one, go.
Welcome everyone to this webinar of the International Mental Health Festival. We'll wait for a bit to allow people to join, and then we'll be ready to start. Now, assuming most people have joined, I have the honor of moderating this session and therefore also of introducing Shelley. Shelley is a Canadian physiotherapist. She's also a yoga therapist, and she advocates for the integration of yoga into modern healthcare. And in this lecture, she's going to talk about compassion in pain care, both for the patient and the healthcare provider. Now, I'll be moderating this lecture, which means that I'll be dealing with questions. If you have a question, you can ask it in the Q&A section. And after the lecture is over, we'll be dealing with those questions. Now, that being said, Shelley, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much. Oh My Mood Foundation. This is wonderful to be a part of this. So as Yop said, I'm going to be talking about compassion in pain care. And I'm just going to share my screen here so you can all see it. And, you know, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart for a variety of reasons. One, just in my own personal life, learning more about compassion and self-compassion, and also professionally learning more about compassion and how to cultivate it more, and then also how to help my patients that I work with who are suffering from and living with chronic pain, how to help them cultivate more self-compassion. So it's something that I'm really passionate about. And, you know, sometimes as healthcare providers, we think maybe this topic doesn't really need to be talked about because it's just an inherent part of what we do. You know, we go into this career to, you know, help people and to serve, and we care and we are compassionate. However, research does show that there are certain barriers, you know, there are challenges that can get in the way of us providing compassion to others, to our patients, and then also having our own self-compassion when things get challenging and when we find it really hard to help others. So, you know, I think this topic is worthy of, you know, being spoken about. And then also the research is showing the value and the importance of compassion in pain care specifically. So before I get, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk first for probably about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So before I get started any further though, I'd like to just share with you all where I'm located. So I am in a small town. It's called Sylvan Lake, Alberta, and it is right in between, it's in Canada, and this is my town here. And it's right in between two big cities called Edmonton and Calgary. So maybe some people have heard of the Canadian Rocky Mountains in Banff. So I'm about 3 hours east of that. And right now our town looks like this. So we are in the middle of winter. As of October 1st, really, we had our first snowfall. And this is our lake. Our Canadian geese have now migrated south for the winter, and in a few weeks this is what our lake's going to look like. It's going to be completely frozen over, and we all get to go skiing and skating, and it's a lovely town. And I do want to acknowledge that I live and work on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. So I have immense gratitude, and I pay my respect to the First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all the First Peoples of Canada, whose diverse histories and the languages and all the cultures enrich this community here where I live. So let's dive into compassion. Now, there's no one agreed upon definition. So I just want to be clear about that. But I've got a book here. I think you can see me in the corner. So this Oxford Handbook of Compassion Science, it's a huge compendium of all the leading researchers and everything you would want to know about compassion. Their working definition in this textbook is compassion is to recognize suffering and to then have the motivation to alleviate it. So it's not just about being kind or being nice. And there's also a behavioral response to that. And it is context dependent. And it also is a dynamic process. So in this short talk, I'm not going to go into the deeper details of the process and some of the components. And we just, in this short talk, we don't have time for all that. But at the end, I have resources where, you can read more about this work and really learn how you can cultivate your own compassion. And so Professor Paul Gilbert, he is a clinical psychologist. He's also a professor at the University of Derby in England and founder of the compassion focused therapy. So he describes these three orientations of compassion. So there's the giving compassion, there's the receiving of compassion, and then there's the giving and receiving to oneself. So that's self-compassion. And this is a really key point. This is one of your gems for this talk. If your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. So that's a really important point to remind ourselves about. It does include ourselves. And when we look at self-compassion, many of you have heard probably of Dr. Kristen Neff. So she is one of our leaders in self-compassion and our pioneers of this self-compassion research. And she describes these three components of self-compassion. So we have the first component is mindfulness. And I think many of us these days have heard this term, and there's maybe different definitions or descriptions floating around. But mindfulness, when we look at it in this context, we're talking about being fully present and aware to what is in the moment. And of course, we can elaborate on that a little bit and say with a non-judgmental type of awareness and even with a compassionate type of awareness. So it's just, really accepting and embracing and being fully present in the moment and to what you're feeling inside your entire being. And then the second component of self-compassion is common humanity. And this is the idea that we are all human and we are all related in that we all make mistakes. It is really our humanity and that connects us to when we do find ourselves maybe doing something we're not proud of or saying something we're not proud of, or maybe not saying something that we think we should have. And these sorts of things, when we're hard on ourselves, it's our common humanity that really brings us together. And I love this quote by Kristen. She says, when we fail or make mistakes, that doesn't separate us from others. That's precisely what unites us to one another. And then the final and third component of Dr. Neff's model is kindness. So this, makes sense and it seems quite obvious, but it's this idea of sending yourself some kind of genuine support, soothing, and kindness. And again, we've got, different processes and ways to cultivate this process of self-compassion. And if we do have time in the Q&A, if we have a little time left over, I'd be happy to take you through a little short meditation to go through these three components. And so I wanted to just briefly go through what the research is telling us about the value of compassion and self-compassion. So this is a whole bunch of the literature, and I just kind of plopped it all on this screen. So there's different, types of research and varying levels of power here, but the effects of self-compassion, what the research is saying in a nutshell is that it seems to help with reducing, you can see these things on the screen, reducing anxiety and depression. They've measured different outcomes to show that it reduces the stress response, rumination, catastrophization, reducing things like perfectionism, which can also lead to anxiety, and reducing self-criticism and even fear of failure. So I think this last little bit, the fear of failure, and then on the next column there, self-compassion, tends to be associated with people exploring new things and trying again after you've failed, and coping with failure and adversity in a more healthy way, and having adaptive coping strategies. And I think that little bit there is really important, because often we think of self-compassion as, well, yeah, it's probably a good thing, but maybe not always. You know, we think, well, it's kind of indulgent, and sometimes that might let us off the hook, and we should be accountable. And that's not what the literature is saying. And true self-compassion is something that actually gives you the resources to really genuinely, truly care for yourself. So what the research shows is that then motivates you. It actually increases your motivation to change your behavior if needed. So I hope that makes some sense. When we're more self-critical, that may work in the short term. But what the research is showing is that can be more associated with anxiety, and that's rooted in a place of fear and competitiveness even with just ourselves, like we're not good enough. So when we practice this self-compassion, it really gives us those inner resources to embrace all our dark sides, our shadow sides, our mistakes. And then from that, the research shows that tends to help us then move forward in a way that's more in line with our values. And so it tends to increase motivation, emotional resiliency, and even life satisfaction. And so when I'm talking here specifically within the context of pain care now, so as a physiotherapist and yoga therapist, I've worked with people in pain for about 22 years now. And what I have on the screen here is the effects of self-compassion in people with persistent or chronic pain. And so the literature is showing that self-compassion can be really valuable for people who are, living and suffering from any type of pain. And what you see here on the screen is we even have research that says it can help reduce pain intensity and levels of disability, reduce negative affect, pain catastrophization, rumination, avoidance, depression, anxiety, the stress response, and anger. And we know that all of those things there that I just mentioned, we know that those are very closely associated with people who are living with pain. And there's many different reasons, which that's part of my work too, that we don't have time to get into, but I will briefly say that when people live with pain for a long time, there are many, many different changes that take place in themselves biologically, changes in the brain, changes in the nervous systems, and then of course changes in their mood, in their emotions, in their cognitive status, in their tissues, in their structure, in their relationships with people and the world around them, in their environment. Even changes can take place in one's own spirit, so how they, relate to themselves and their true essence and meaning and purpose in life. So it's really important when we're trying to help people in pain, that we look at the whole being. And I do believe, and the research from my own experience, and the research is showing this, that this self-compassion piece is really this foundation upon which all of that then can be built, the progressing towards a better, better health and well-being. And so self-compassion in people with pain has also shown to increase pain self-efficacy. So that's the idea that people feel like they have some control, that they're able to control and manage their pain, and increase pain acceptance, which has been shown to be an important part of pain care, that acceptance with like not resisting and then moving through and making changes, and increasing positive affect. And I wanted to share this quote with you. So I've co-edited and co-authored a book, Yoga and Science in Pain Care, Treating the Person in Pain. And this quote is from chapter 1. So chapter 1 is by a pain advocate, Joletta Belton, and she talks about, it's a beautiful chapter, she talks about the lived experience of pain. So this quote these are her words taken from the chapter. I'll read it. I was quite angry and upset with myself for a long time, beating myself up constantly for not being able to figure it out, for not doing this pain thing right, for not getting better when I was supposed to. I beat myself up for being in pain at all, for not handling it better, handling it like I should have. It took a long time and a lot of practice to begin to be kind and compassionate with myself, to see that I'm just human, just trying to figure it all out like everybody else is, having very human experiences, of which pain and suffering were a part. I'm more kind and compassionate with myself now. So I thought that was a beautiful quote. And she goes on in the chapter to talk about a variety of different things that have helped her with her long-standing battle with persistent pain, and self-compassion being a really key part to opening that door for other things to emerge. And then I want to switch gears and talk about the value of self-compassion within the healthcare provider. And so we have some research that shows this helps to improve health outcomes, improve emotional resiliency, and increase concern for others. So I think that's really interesting too, that if we can cultivate our own self-compassion, we have research that shows that tends to increase then care for others. And I would say that I feel some of that in my life. I mean, I haven't measured it in my own life per se, but I've noticed over the years after practicing some of these self-compassion practices, I feel less judgmental towards myself. And I think that's starting to trickle over. I'm trying to be less judgmental, or it's even just naturally showing up in myself, that I feel like I'm less judgmental to others. So I think that's kind of interesting. And I think really important for us health professionals when we're working with people who are dealing with a lot of complex issues, and we're doing this day in, day out, and with a lot of different people. And I'm going to talk about in a moment some of the barriers to compassion. So this increased concern for others, I think, is an important finding. And then, of course, increased self-compassion can help reduce empathic distress and burnout. And then the next couple minutes, I just want to share with you the research around compassion for people we serve. Now, this one is, it's, I think, kind of obvious. It's a good thing to offer compassion to the people that we're working with. But in case you need some more convincing, this is what, the body of literature is showing us: improving things like quality of care and patient outcomes, satisfaction, improving our therapeutic alliance with our patients. And that's really important. We're seeing more and more in the literature that this therapeutic alliance is more important than we once thought, and may not always be about the technique that we're using, or the method that we're using. It might be about our relationship. And then also you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, some of the research shows that us being more compassionate can actually help protect against healthcare practitioner burnout and reduce our own anxiety and depression, and improve our own mental and physical health as healthcare providers, and reducing things like even medical costs and errors and malpractice claims. But you see on the screen there at the very bottom on the left, I have one I left to the end. I wanted to share with you that it seems that when we provide more compassionate care to the people we're working with, it seems that this leads to higher patient self-care. I think that's really interesting. And there is this study that I wanted to share with you. So this was a study that came out of Sweden, And they had 10 women who were suffering from chronic pain, persistent pain. And it was a 1-year long study in this integrative rehabilitation program in a hospital. And their aim was to explore patients' experience, the experience that they had with the care that they were receiving. And then they were going to track their progress in their own self-care. And what they found is that the women were only able to take successful steps towards active self-care once they were able to experience loving, compassionate care from the healthcare provider. And so some of the quotes, and they had focus groups, and it was a beautiful qualitative research. And some of the quotes that the women were saying was that they reported feeling well cared for and respected, listened to. They felt worthy and whole and even loved. And then, like I said, it was only then that they could feel that they were worthy enough to, to really take care of themselves. And this is an important piece, because in our work as healthcare providers, when we're trying to help people, one thing that we're always trying to do is this idea of self-care. We're always trying to promote self-care within the person and say, these are some things that you can do to help yourselves. And sometimes we feel frustrated when that's not happening. But here's another perspective, to look at and help us be patient and keep trying to cultivate our own compassion. And just the quote that comes from the study I wanted to share: self-care has to be much more than advice, education, and training for people with complex suffering. The journey to health begins when the sufferer experiences what it is to be cared for. Okay, so now the last little section here, I'd like to just chat about the barriers to compassion. So like I said at the beginning, compassion, it's inherent in us. This is what we want to provide. But sometimes, and I'm sure you can just sit back and think of maybe times when you weren't acting as compassionately as you could have or should have. There are reasons and barriers. So let's just go through those briefly. So one here is if our own physiological state is dysregulated, the research shows just even neurobiologically, it's going to be harder for us to provide compassion. So these feelings of feeling overwhelmed, and that could be feeling overwhelmed by the person's distress in front of us. Maybe we feel helpless. There's nothing we can do to help them, and that can affect our own physiological state. Also unmanaged personal distress, so in our own lives, so other things that are going on, and they could be larger, bigger, grander type things, but even just sometimes the small things, or having a bad day or a bad week or a bad season or something, going on in our own lives. If we are dysregulated, our system is not set up to be thriving in a sense of safety and feeling socially engaged, and we're going to be less likely to provide those responses. So another reason is that we might feel some anger. As the healthcare provider, we might feel impatient towards, the person that we're working with. And we may feel that in some sense that compassion isn't maybe what they need. We may feel that the person is unworthy of compassion. Maybe our values are different. And maybe we feel that something they've told us or how they have been behaving, that doesn't align with our values. So we might have some aversion towards that. Another one might be that we just really it kind of dovetails on this other one, but we might really believe that compassion is unhelpful in this particular case. We may be thinking, well, that's letting the person off the hook. Maybe our own belief, we were raised to like to have that self-critical voice, and maybe we believe that tough love and being hard and harsh is going to be better for the person. So we might have some of those deep-seated beliefs that will trickle down. Also, we may have a fear of the cost of caring. So we may have been told that it's this idea of we can't have too much compassion or we'll get that compassion fatigue, or if we care too much, we'll burn out. So we're taught to disconnect, to keep sort of a distance, and it might be an unwritten rule. And we might feel this is something that we've practiced because it's helped us. But when we look at compassion, excuse me for a moment. But when we look at compassion, and again, I don't have a lot of time to go into it in this talk, but like I said, the resources at the end I'll share. When we look at compassion, it does debunk kind of this myth that it leads to burnout. And then we've got also, we have to talk about organizational barriers. So it could be that you have a tremendous workload, shortage of time, perhaps with people, long hours, paperwork, there's administrative pressures, there's productivity standards. You may have lack of support from the organization. And I don't know, like I said, I'm a physiotherapist. So if there's a lot of mental health practitioners listening to this, I don't know if this will apply to you as much, but in my work as a physiotherapist, a lot of the settings we're in are open. So there's a lack of privacy. You might feel a little self-conscious maybe with some conversations that you know need to be had, and you can't offer that because you just might feel a little self-conscious and also privacy issues. Sometimes we're in a gym setting or we have curtains, but I think my experience in mental health is that, you do really have that privacy. So that part might not apply to you. But we also have to look at social pressures. So, really looking at ourselves and how we relate to people and our patients as well. And do we feel a little uncomfortable sometimes, or maybe embarrassed even, because these compassionate conversations are maybe frowned upon in the environment that we're in, and maybe seen from the environment that we're in as unprofessional. And we do have research that shows competitive work environments are not conducive to compassion versus the environments that are socially safe and where there's a high camaraderie. That's where compassion thrives, and that makes sense. So just wrapping up, I want to share that compassion is indeed trainable. So if we have some of these barriers or that I've just talked about, the good news is that there are things that we can do to cultivate compassion. And so that's not part of this talk, but I wanted to share these two models. This is just to give you an idea of how we would help to cultivate self-compassion and compassion. So I've already talked about this one. So that's Dr. Kristen Neff. And so she has these components of improving mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness. And there's a variety of different self-compassion practices that one can do. And then Joan Halifax. So Joan is a Zen Buddhist teacher, an anthropologist, ecologist. She's a hospice healthcare provider. And she has this model of enactive compassion. And this is a model that describes the compassion as more of a dynamic process. So it includes many elements, and to six elements to be exact. And it's this idea that when we practice these elements, they then prime for a compassionate response or a compassion wisdom to emerge from that process. And I've got that's in my book chapter that I have in the book that I talked about, Compassion in Pain Care. So I talk about this process and I give examples of different practices, and I pair that with different yoga practices. And so we have to understand that this compassion wisdom that emerges is something that's not only ethical and mutually agreeable, but it's really unique to the context of that present situation of the moment. So compassion is not a canned response. It's not even something that, it's not even really something that we can predict. It's not a predetermined behavior. So what might be a compassionate action in one moment, or even with that same person, on another day, even in a similar situation, may not be a compassionate action. So it depends on the context. So it's really important to understand it's a process and it's a wisdom. So this just kind of puts the key points that I thought was important, pretty simple points, but yes, we can cultivate compassion, and remember that includes self-compassion. That's so important. And think of this more as a compassion wisdom that emerges. And yes, we have research, but also anecdotally, many of us see the value of compassion in pain care. So here are some resources, and this is being recorded, and this talk will be on YouTube. So it's okay if you missed it all, just go back and watch it. The one on the left, Compassion Bridging Practice and Science, is a phenomenal ebook, and you can download it. And then there's, of course, I'm not going to say each one, but you can see them there. And the book that I co-edited and co-authored with many phenomenal colleagues, beautiful, wise people, is the one in the middle, Yoga and Science in Pain Care, Treating the Person in Pain. And like I said, I have that chapter in there, Compassion in Pain Care. I will just mention the workbook there at the bottom, Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer, an amazing workbook that has a lot of different practices if you're interested in this cultivation. And then I'll just have this up there. So when you rewatch and you look at the YouTube video, you can have a look at some of those sites. I do have, some free webinars and resources. And the very bottom there is a nice blog post that I compiled, and it has all of my resources that lead to different, whether they're articles or videos, etc., that all have to do with compassion, and particularly in the context of pain. So I thank you for listening and for your attention. And you can see there I've got my social media handles, so where you can contact me. I have a YouTube channel and my Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram, or just my website there. You can contact me through my website, and or just Google my name and find me, and I will stop sharing my screen, and we'll see if anyone has any questions. I'll just leave some time here.
Yeah, we'll move into the Q&A now. And firstly, thank you very much, Shelley. It was incredibly interesting, and also for all the resources you've compiled. That's amazing for people out there. I also want to say, for everyone watching via the live stream, you can also ask questions via Facebook, via the comments underneath the live stream. I will also read those. So that might also help. Now, an interesting one to start with is maybe, right, because you have quite some background in yoga. Do you also think that yoga can help in enhancing self-compassion? And if so, would you want to elaborate a bit on that?
Oh, that's great. Thank you for whoever asked that. So, what's so beautiful about yoga? Yoga is a philosophy and includes practices. So yoga is this health system. So yoga inherently is rooted and grounded in compassion, which includes self-compassion. So the short answer is yes. I mean, it is rooted in compassion, and also compassion can emerge from yoga practice. And just to give you a little bit of insight on when we say yoga practice, that can mean a lot of different things. There's many different paths, many different types. And so yoga practice may not always mean doing those postures, those poses that you may see on Instagram. That can be part of it, the movement, but not necessarily just about the movement. A movement is one part. There's breathing exercises, there's meditation, there's different awareness practices. And then again, it's rooted in a philosophy, which we don't have time to get into, obviously, but all of that compassion can emerge. And the last thing I'll say about that is what's really cool is we think about, I mean, you can hear that and you can say, okay, but then I like to go a little bit deeper and think, well, why? And we don't know the underlying mechanisms per se, but when you parse out the research, and I do talk about this in the book chapter, when we parse out the research a little bit, we can see, okay, look at what they're doing now in the research to cultivate compassion and to cultivate self-compassion. And when you look at all of those components, like the mindfulness, I mean, that's inherently part of yoga. We do a ton of that. That is part of yoga, right? And then when we look at the common humanity part, that's part of yoga, our connection, our unity. Some of the philosophy of yoga is about this essence of connection and that we are all connected in some way. And then remember that third part, the kindness. Well, that's one of the yamas and niyamas, is this idea of kindness and non-harming and non-violence. And then when you look at the Joan Halifax's model of compassion, and I, again, didn't have time to go through all those 6 elements, but I'll briefly say that each one of those 6 elements I parallel to yoga. And so, and it's things like, again, attention, mindfulness, in setting intentions, and also things like interoceptive awareness practices. So I'll end this question by talking about a huge part of yoga is cultivating self-awareness of our whole being. So that's awareness of the thoughts, the emotions, the breath, the physical body, spirit, you know, the environment around us. Did I miss one? Body, mind, spirit. It's just our whole being. And so we have a whole host of practices in yoga and philosophy that help cultivate that awareness. And then the research shows, for a variety of you know, different hypothesized reasons, that helps prime for compassion. The more aware we can be of our own internal state and around us, the more wisdom we can have to provide a compassionate response. So that was a little bit longer, but I think that hopefully shed light on that question.
Yeah, that's a very elaborate answer. Thanks a lot. And I can also imagine that there's people at home who might consider something like this, and to whom this, especially the mindfulness component, sounds very analogous to more classic meditation, where you're just seated still, and maybe you listen to a recording. Whereas I think most people associate yoga indeed more with elements of the breath, elements of moving. How do you feel that classic mindfulness meditation compares with yoga in cultivating self-compassion?
Yeah, that's a really great question. You know, I think that one's above my pay scale, because I think as far as classic, you know, your term classic meditation, that's not something that, you know, I have expertise in. I mean, we're all beginner meditators, I guess, but, you know, meditation is something, you know, I practice, but that's not something that I claim to, you know, have really formally studied in to teach others meditation. Meditation is a part of yoga, and I definitely integrate different types of mindfulness practices, which would be, you know, that open kind of monitoring, but also focused, right? So I do help to teach people to focus on maybe a breath and just to sit and do those awareness practices, like watch the breath, watch the thoughts, watch the emotions. So we could say, I guess that's a form of meditation. But again, like what you're saying with classic meditation, yeah, I wouldn't feel comfortable really speaking to, like, what do you mean by classic meditation and what, so I think, you know, and I will say something that comes to mind though now on that. So part of the 8-limbed approach in one of the paths of yoga, that's the main path, the Raja Yoga, that I'm familiar with, that I've studied in, and that's what I use in the yoga therapy. And, you know, those last 3 limbs, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi, and excuse my Sanskrit if, you know, for those scholars who might be listening, but I'm trying. So Dharana is that concentration and focus, right? And that's, I do that myself. I practice that. I share that with my patients. And that could be, you're just focusing and concentrating on whatever. Like I said, it could be breath, or certain, body, when you're breathing, it could be a body scan as you're watching how the body moves and timing with breath. It could be as you're doing a movement practice, you're really focusing on a single point, like a visual cue. So it could be any kind of anchor, but it's this idea of really cultivating that focus and that concentration. So that's that dharana. And then the path then leads to this, then the next stage, dhyana, which is meditation. So we could say, okay, that's what you mean by classic meditation. That's meditation in yoga. And so that part of yoga, that meditation, it's an effortless state of attention. So it's a little different, right? You've got the focus, concentration. Well, you've got, let's say, the mindfulness, which is just being present and aware. And then you've got the focus and concentration. And then from there, it goes into that effortless, attentive state of meditation. And then the final one is that samadhi, which is, that whatever you want to call it, enlightenment. We like to say that's where you feel real connected to, purpose, meaning, your essence. That's how we talk about it in our language in the healthcare community, right? We're trying to bridge the classic wisdom of yoga with modern healthcare. So Yop, did that kind of answer? So meditation is absolutely a part of yoga.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
No, and I personally always appreciate that you yourself acknowledge your boundaries of expertise. But a lot of people don't do that, so that's amazing. And it's very clear how mindfulness is only a component of it, whereas yoga as a whole draws on a lot more. So that makes sense.
Yes, good. Yeah, yoga is a philosophy, it's a system, and there's different practices and different paths, and meditation is a huge part of that path. And mindfulness too is, it's so easy for us all. I mean, and most of us, I would say, do it at some point. We're being mindful, and you can do, throughout your day. I mean, I've got in case I forget this, I want to share this, and it's in all my resources, but something that's really easy we can all do that I love, I call it the toilet meditation. So if you think about this, we all go to the bathroom about 6 to 8 times a day. It's what we do. And it's a beautiful moment because it's always in private, mostly in private, right? So it's a chance to, okay, you've got, and it might be 1 minute, 2, maybe a little longer if you've got some more business to do, but you're sitting there or standing and it's a moment. And so I have these 6 stages, it's an acronym that I have, and you just every time you go, you can go through that just briefly and quickly. And that's mindfulness, right? Present, dropping in, observing, you're not judging, you're just checking in. And
I love that because it's also super accessible. People can't, you can't make the excuse for yourself, I'm too busy today. That's
well, and what I like, because that's one thing that I learned, working with people for 22 years and ongoing. One of the biggest challenges I keep hearing time and time again, it's just, it's time. And and I'm not even going to, here's this compassion piece. I get it, because all we have to think about is what's something, and you don't have to answer this, job, but what's something that you're struggling with, like a habit, and it could be something simple, or, what's something you'd like to change, either change or add, and what do? Like, we do well for a while, and then we go back into the old habit, and sometimes we are successful, but if you really think about something you're struggling with, and we all have that. And so it's no different than the people that we're working with who have been struggling for 25 years. And, and then they're coming to all these different healthcare providers. And as the healthcare provider, we're saying, well, if you would only just do that, and that, but it's so much more complicated that there's a million reasons why maybe the person is having a challenge, and they may think it's because of time. Oh, I forgot, or I didn't have time, but there's some maybe deeper reasons and things going on. And so it's our job to, to keep trying to help, obviously, and serve. And that's where the compassion piece and cultivating that can help us as the provider to be more patient, keep trying, and then back to the toilet meditation, like you said, it's so accessible because then it reminds you. And that's all you need is just those few minutes, and you're 6 to 8 times a day, and it's easy. There's no right or wrong. You're just sitting, and you don't take your phone in there anymore, and it's if I don't know if we have any more questions. If we don't, I can quickly go through the 6 stages, but I'll see if we have some more questions.
Yeah, I think there's a very interesting one that touches upon this a bit, which is, okay, so it's quite clear why it's very important to have self-compassion, and there are these specific techniques that can help you get there, like the yoga or the toilet meditation. But all of those techniques require you to have some form of self-compassion to begin them in the first place, right? So to get to the mat, you need to already want yourself to become more self-compassionate, but then that's also the goal. So what would you say to people who can't muster up the self-compassion to even get to the mat or do this meditation practice at the toilet? I think it was a very interesting question we got.
That's a great question. Yeah. So I think the first, I'm going to just sit with that for a moment. So I think this would be a good opportunity to just kind of go back to those 3 components of self-compassion. So let's put aside for a moment the idea that you have another thing to do, even the toilet meditation. So, so that's just, how do I even get to the mat? There's maybe just so much, and I'm going to use this word, like shame, blame, maybe self-loathing, I'm not worthy enough. And so I'm kind of repeating the question to get my mind going here. So you just don't even, want to go on the mat, or you don't even want to do the toilet meditation. Okay, so that's where we're at. Then I would say just go back to those components of mindfulness, common humanity, and kindness. So here's a little brief exercise, just a moment. So even right now, so whoever asked that, and everybody listening, if you're in a moment even right now where you're feeling that shame, blame, lack of motivation, or you just are so frustrated with yourself, that's it. You're already doing it. Even asking that question, you're already doing it. So the first is just mindfulness. You're aware, and so you just say, oh, this is hard. Like, I can't even get to the mat. I have no motivation. I don't even want to do the mindfulness on the toilet. Like, perfect. So mindfulness, that's all that it is, inviting you. When I wouldn't even say inviting you, because then it's like another thing to do. It's like just allowing you, just give yourself permission to, it's okay. So if you can even think, and if you're not really having a hard time in this moment, you can even just close your eyes and just think of a moment that, something you're really struggling with right now. So you can just take a moment right now, even as you're listening to this, something, maybe it's something to do with yourself and the habit you have, or maybe it's a relationship with someone, like something challenging. And just kind of bring that up. And if it's too overwhelming for you, like maybe don't go there right now. Don't pick the worst thing, but just something, and just kind of play it out and see how you're feeling, how it feels in your body, what's being said, or maybe what you're saying to yourself. And so it's this idea, when you're in that moment, now say, okay, here it is. This is hard. That's the mindfulness piece. This is challenging. That's that acceptance. And then the second piece, the common humanity, it's just saying, okay, like you're not alone. So you just say, I'm not alone. And you really, really aren't. We all have different scenarios in that, but this is a human experience. Shame, lack of motivation, frustration, 20 years still not able to do what you're told, and that's a whole issue. There's problems there, people, telling you, but we'll put that aside for a moment. But just all this going on, that's part of being human. You're not alone. So just if you can just say, okay, remind yourself, there are lots of other people. This is part of what connects us. And then the kindness part. So this is the part where you have to do something, but in this moment now, so I got you to think about that and kind of bring you back there again. And so you did the mindfulness, you did the common humanity. So now the kindness, it's, if you struggle with that, just even think, what would you love to hear right now? What would you love to hear from somebody? Like, what would be something you want to hear, or even an action? You know, could you use a hug from someone? Or I'll share one with you that for myself that that's come up for me. I've been doing these practices, and one that just helps me. And I'm okay to share it. It might sound a little silly, but I just say, I put my hands here over my heart. And I just kind of bow, and I just take a moment, and I say, I'm a good person. I'm a good person. And I just repeat that. And it helps me, you know, I'm a good person. Okay, I made a mistake. I did something bad. But I'm a good person. And so that's all you have to do is think of that's that third kindness piece. It could be this. Maybe you don't have something that comes up as a affirmation. Maybe it's a boundary you set. So maybe the kind thing in that moment is to remove yourself from the situation, and you need some space. Maybe your act of kindness is, I need to pick up the phone and call, you know, so-and-so. And so that is right there. So you don't have to get on a mat. You don't have to, it's just finding these challenging moments throughout your day and going through those three components, you know, is where you start.
Wow, that's incredibly powerful, especially the idea of like, once you're aware that you don't even want to go to the mat, that is in itself already mindfulness. You're already doing it.
Oh, yeah.
Very clever. Yeah.
And the self-compassion piece is so accepting and embracing, like that's okay. Because you know what yoga tells us, and the self-compassion literature too, but is like, if we add more resistance to that, so this idea that, you know, you don't feel like going on the mat or doing whatever, if you add more resistance to that, like the self-critical voice, I mean, it can work in the short term, like I said, so you can just, that tough hand, oh, I can force myself, but it seems to increase more anxiety, and it's out of fear. It's not out of genuine love for yourself. And so you can see the fine line here, and I can already see, you know, some people's maybe minds turning, because this is where my mind goes is, yeah, but if I just want to eat ice cream all day, have potato chips, or if I just don't feel like going on the mat, if I just succumb to that, like I'll never do anything. But that's not what self-compassion talks about. Self-compassion talks about how you have to, or welcomes you, gives yourself permission to be okay with that, you know, not getting on the mat, like embrace that first and just being mindful, and then non-judgment, love yourself. And from that, remember that one slide I had, from that, it is correlated with changing behavior, with motivation. So the end goal isn't, I'm going to do this self-compassion stuff so I'm more motivated. That really, it's, you're doing it just to love yourself and to be genuinely kind. And with time, it's a process. You know, then you do step on the mat, and then I could go on, but you maybe you're not stepping on the mat because it's not meaningful for you. Maybe that's not what you want. Maybe you used to do that, or maybe again that's what you're told, but maybe it's, you know, going for a walk in nature, or maybe some kind of, you know, you've been told it's important to move the body, you know, that's good for your depression. We know that, but maybe for you, maybe one of the reasons why you're having trouble getting on the mat is because you don't like that form of movement. So that's a whole other, you know, kind of rabbit hole, because there's all kinds of reasons, but that's where you need the support from professionals to help guide you. Okay, well, that's not working. And yeah.
Yeah, that's very elaborate. Thank you. Quite clear.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe to close off, what's the one take-home message you would want listeners, both caregivers and people receiving care, to take away from tonight?
I would say, reiterating what I said, the one key message is that it's okay to not be compassionate, to not be hate. It's okay. That's if we hold ourselves up to that, we're setting ourselves up for failure. So it's okay to have those challenges and to make mistakes and not be compassionate and to not be self-compassionate. It's okay. And it can be cultivated, that the whole process can be cultivated.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the lecture, being part of the International Mental Health Festival. And thank you for everyone who listened in.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Ciao, ciao.